Hi, so we are now into our third lecture of the AP World Curriculum. And today we're going to take a look at South and Southeast Asia from about 600 to about 1450 CE. So this is the third topic of the first unit. And what I want to do is now that we're on to about our third topic, I want to point out how Unit 1 is organized. Unit 1 in the AP curriculum is called the Global Tapestry. And what it's trying to do is give you a snapshot of the world by jumping from place to place. Our first lecture focused on Song China. Our second lecture went to the Middle East and looked at this thing called Dar al-Islam. And now we're coming over to South and Southeast Asia. But what you should be noticing is that there's a commonality so far between these three regions, that they represent both continuity, innovation, and diverse populations. And you want to see that there's a continuity going on in these three regions where they're trying to maintain tradition from more ancient established civilizations and ancient established empires. The second thing is that there are innovations, new ideas, new improvements that allow for better farming and better trade, better transportation, better economic interaction. And then the third thing is that these deal with diverse populations. In the case of China, China was dealing with diversity in terms of religion, but also with diverse groups around East Asia or throughout East Asia, like the Vietnamese, the Koreans, the Japanese, the nomadic peoples of the North and the West. The Dar al-Islam is a study in a diverse population held together by a common religion called Islam. And when we look at South and Southeast Asia, we're going to see even more diversity. So without any further ado, let's get to the information about South and Southeast Asia. And I'm going to be moving myself around depending on the slide, so bear with me. There we go. Now the slide advances. So I'm going to pop myself up here so I'm out of the way. And when we talk about South Asia, the countries we want to focus on are really Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, but the big two are India and Pakistan. So we refer to this whole region as the South Asian region in AP World History. When we look at the political background, what we want to appreciate is that South Asia has a history of a decentralized system of governing. There are a few times that there is a central kingdom, and I've got three of them on the left side of this slide. But for the most part, South Asia is dominated by small local regional kingdoms that maintain their local regional identity. So when we talk about South Asia in 600, 700, 800, we don't want to say India because there is no India as a political entity yet. There is a culture throughout South Asia that has some cohesion, but politically is a fragmented, decentralized area with interruptions of centralization. So the second thing we want to look at is the large empires that do develop in South Asia. And when you look over on the left, you will see a South Asia with a green section in the northern part of South Asia. That is the Gupta Empire, and it goes from about the 3rd century CE to about 543 CE. What I want you to know about the Gupta Empire is that this is considered kind of the classical age of India. And in a lot of ways, the kingdoms and the areas that we're looking at are trying to recapture and recreate these ancient kingdoms that had existed and provided centralization in those regions. So the Gupta Empire, if you want to think of it, is a standard bearer of centralized kingdom within South Asia. It is also a Hindu kingdom where Hinduism is the predominant religion. So when we look at the top map of the Kaala Empire, that goes from 850 to 1279, you'll see that is largely focused in the southern region of South Asia. And what the Kaala Dynasty does is it tries to bring back and maintain those traditions of Hinduism while also incorporating innovations to agriculture and other cultural developments with architecture, with poetry, with art. And you have this dynasty that exists that is an attempt to kind of bring some type of central order to South Asia, but you'll see it's very limited. And the Kaala dynasty eventually gives way to another dynasty that develops, the Vijay Anagara Empire. I'm going to go with that today. Now, here's the important thing. You don't need to memorize these empires' names, but you do need to recognize them because they pop up in documents and as sources. And if you appreciate that these two dynasties are central kingdoms within the southern area of South Asia, then you're in good shape. That's all you really need to know for our course. And they also represent a continuity of Hinduism. They are going to maintain that sort of tradition of trying to create a centralized Hindu state. So one of the things that I also want you to note with the two kingdoms, the second two kingdoms, is how connected they are going to be to the Indian Ocean and how that's going to allow for the spread of the South Asian culture throughout the Indian Ocean and affect Southeast Asia. But we'll talk more about that later. So we move to the next thing, and I'm going to just move myself over here. We want to talk about religious influences. And this is the second big thing. If you go back to the empire thing, really the big idea that I want you to understand is the decentralized aspect of South Asia. That really there aren't a lot of strong central kingdoms that last for hundreds and hundreds of years. They come and they go. And for the most part, if you keep that in mind, you'll be good with the political aspects. But one of the things that brings this defragmented or this fragmented region together is the religion of Hinduism. So I don't want to go into a full-blown discussion of the beliefs of Hinduism. I'm going to summarize them. There's some important concepts worth noting. First of all, within Hinduism is the concept of Brahman. So Brahman refers to the concept of the universal soul. And Brahman is present in everything. Anywhere there is life, there is Brahman. So if you want, you can think of it this way. If I go to the ocean and I have several different cups and pots and pans, and I fill all of that with water, all those cups, pots, and pans may be separate vessels, but what's in it, the water, all comes from the same part. It is the same essence, the same substance, the ocean. Brahman is that universal soul that exists within all life, according to Hinduism. And what Hinduism does is usually associated with the worshiping of many gods. And some people will incorrectly state this as polytheism. But Hinduism believes that all life has the same substance within it, that substance of Brahman, the universal soul. So all of those gods are separate manifestations of the one, of Brahman. And we call this type of religion Hinotheism, where there's several different expressions of one identity, or of God, if you will. So Brahman, the best translation I can give you is God, but it's a much more abstract concept than we're used to thinking about God. The gods that we see within Hinduism are all manifestations of that one universal soul of Brahman, which brings me to the concepts of Dharma, karma, and reincarnation. So the idea of Dharma is that there is moral obligation that you are obliged to follow through on. Dharma is morality. Dharma, I had one student explain to me that it literally just means religion. It's what you're expected to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the righteous thing to do. So to follow your Dharma is to live a virtuous life. When you follow your Dharma, you build karma. You build good karma. If you neglect your Dharma, you build bad karma. And the idea is that people are rewarded and punished for their adherence to or ignorance of their Dharma. So karma, the best way to put it is what goes around comes around. If you do good into the world, down the road, good will be visited upon you. And if you do bad to the world, down the road, bad will be visited upon you. The best example is an ancient Indian game where you had what's called snakes and ladders. and you would go through a series of paths, and sometimes you would go up ladders and you would go up to a higher state of existence in the game, or you would catch a snake, which was like a demon, was associated with evil activity, and you would fall down and you go lower. And of course, we know this game as shoots and ladders. And if you ever take a moment to look at a shoots and ladder board, you'll see that every ladder, at the base of the ladder, is somebody doing a good deed. And at the top of the ladder is them getting rewarded for that. And then at every shoot, you'll see them doing something taboo or naughty. And then you'll see at the bottom of the chute the consequences for their misaction. So this law of karma, it isn't that the gods are punishing, it's a law of nature. It's how the world works. And the goal is to achieve what we call moksha. Now I'm adding this in, but moksha basically translates to salvation. You can't do this in just one lifetime. You have to do it over several lifetimes. And that brings us to the biggest concept that most people know about Hinduism, which is reincarnation. So reincarnation, you get to come back and you get to learn more and work your way up. If you think of the chutes and ladders analogy, work your way up to space 100. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the role of the caste system. Now, this is an important concept. What South Asia is going to do in concert with the religion is develop a social structure that has divisions. You have an upper caste or an upper class, which is referred to as the Brahman, and these are your priests and these are your religious leaders. They will develop over time as the most educated and the most privileged within society. And then underneath the Brahmin, the priestly class, is the king and warrior class. Underneath them are the merchant class. Underneath them are the servant class. And then underneath all of them are the untouchables. So the idea is that the caste system creates a social division of privilege within South Asia. And even though you have political differences in different political kingdoms, the caste system is applicable all throughout South Asia. And it becomes ingrained as a way of managing social interactions. So now again, we're coming to this idea that there are ways to maintain social interaction. In China, Confucianism is the basis for that. In South Asia, the caste system will be the way society interacts. In Dar al-Islam, it's the religion of Islam that governs the behaviors of the people, particularly of the Muslims within that region. So we're finding that these diverse populations can be held together by a common system of expectations and behaviors. So that's what I mean in letter D about the caste system acting as an agent of social cohesion. Again, South Asia is politically disunited for most of the time. Empires and dynasties will emerge, but what we know today as India doesn't exist yet. There is this political separation within that region. But there's a cultural commonality that goes thousands of years ago. So there's that continuity that we focus on when we look at these kingdoms, when we look at these regions. Now we get to another religion that develops in South Asia called Buddhism. So the story of Buddhism deals with a prince named Siddhartha. He comes out of the caste that has the kings and the warriors. And Siddhartha finds himself a rich, privileged prince. He lives the life of luxury. And then he sees in a parade of his city, he sees old men. And he discovers to his horror that people grow sick and they die. And he begins to appreciate that people suffer. And he realizes that he is also destined to grow sick and to die, and then to be reborn and come back and do it again. And so what Siddhartha discovers is that people suffer. And Siddhartha makes it his task to overcome suffering, to achieve moksha, to find a path to overcome suffering. And that leads him to leave his princely life and become an ascetic. giving up food, giving up dress, giving up all the luxuries of life. And he goes from one extreme, the luxurious lifestyle, to one of self-denial. So now you've got Siddhartha living in the woods, an ascetic monk essentially, praying, meditating, trying to find this path out of suffering. Then one day, the story goes that he heard a musician teaching a student on a boat on the river. And the musician says to his student, if you tighten the string of the instrument too much, it will snap. But if you leave it too slack, it will not play. So Siddhartha discovers that the answer to overcoming suffering is what they call the middle way. Siddhartha follows the middle way, reaches enlightenment, and becomes known as the Buddha. The Buddha translates to as the enlightened one. So in a way, according to Buddhism, Siddhartha discovers the key to unlocking suffering. He takes that knowledge back and he starts to preach it, if you will, and gain followers. This is all happening around 500 BCE. And he begins to get a following of Buddhist converts. And Buddhism begins the process of spreading throughout South Asia. Now, it doesn't necessarily displace Hinduism, but it does start to build a following in about 300 BCE, a king that unites all of South Asia, except for a couple small parts in the south, is a Buddhist. So you have this idea that Buddhism preaches what's called the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is that life is suffering. We suffer. To be alive is to suffer. And the second noble truth is that wants and desires cause our suffering. The third noble truth is that in order to get rid of suffering, we need to end wants and desires. We need to stop wanting and we need to stop desiring, because the unfulfillment of our wants and desires causes us to suffer. And this could be on a very superficial material level, and it could also be at a very deep level, like our need to be loved, our need to be secure, our need to be safe causes us to become anxious and to suffer. So what Buddha or Siddhartha says is to follow the middle way in order to overcome wants and desires. And the middle way is summed up by the advice the musician gives to his student, to find that middle ground between the two extremes. According to Buddhism, if you are able to do that, you can achieve enlightenment just like Siddhartha did. So Buddhism is a salvation religion, not unlike Christianity and Islam. It promises its followers a program, if you will, a way of overcoming and achieving something great within this lifetime. And Buddhism is going to appeal to the lower caste individuals throughout South Asia. Because for the lower caste individuals of South Asia, there is really no chance at salvation within this lifetime. If they are good servants, they can be reincarnated as something better in the social caste system. But Buddhism makes that promise that they can be saved in this lifetime. They can achieve salvation within this life. So your earlier converts to Buddhism are going to come from the lower classes of society, but Buddhism really doesn't take over South Asia. In fact, by about 400 CE, Buddhism is being pulled into Hinduism. The two religions are kind of making a peace with one another. And Buddhism has a small presence throughout South Asia. The spread out of South Asia is going to be because of trade. The Silk Road and the Indian Ocean Trade Network allows Buddhism to spread out to different regions. And that's where you see Buddhism spreading into China. And of course, once Buddhism leaves its home of origin, that's a redundant term, once it leaves the home and it goes into other cultures, it becomes influenced by those cultures. So if you take a look over at the right, Buddhism and Hinduism, and there's a Venn diagram showing you the comparisons and the differences. So in Buddhism, the Eightfold Path is the 8 ways of following the middle path. and that gets into a little bit more detail. But the idea of no belief in personal gods, that's an important thing, especially out of what we call Theravadian Buddhism. So you know that in China, there's the Mahayana Buddhism, which does incorporate gods and deities and has much more of a traditional idea of religion with multiple gods. Your Theravadian Buddhism, which is more like the original Buddha or the original Buddhism in the sense that it comes out of India, there's no belief in a personal God. There's Buddha statues, but Buddha or Siddhartha was a man just like anybody else who achieved something great and was worthy of following. If you look on the Hinduism side, you'll see Brahman and Atman. I'll just tell you that Atman means the presence of Brahman within the individual. And we live with the illusion that that is a separate thing from my neighbor. In other words, I see myself as different and unique, when in fact, since we're made of the same substance, we are just extensions of the same thing. If your head is spinning, don't worry about it. This won't be on the test necessarily. And then the four castes and the devotion to multiple gods. The thing that I caution you about is this multiple gods concept. Within Hinduism, those multiple gods are manifestation of the one universal soul. So are they really different, or are they just different elements of the same thing? I'll let you think about that. And then when you see the two overlap, that word moksha, that means salvation. That's when this process of birth, death, and rebirth comes to an end, and the Atman, the individual soul, if you will, rejoins the universal soul. So, like I said, I don't want to get too deep into the religious beliefs of both of them. What I want you to understand is that Hinduism and Buddhism become important elements of South Asia. And as those South Asian merchants begin to spread along the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia, they transport Hinduism and Buddhism out to different regions. And that's an important development that we'll see in Southeast Asia. Now, the next thing is the arrival of Islam. So now we're going to throw a third religion. Now, here comes your diversity within this region. This diversity is going to have a religious diversity. With the arrival of Islam in about the 8th century, and I'm going to I'll move myself down so that you can see this. The South Asian experience with Western invaders, what you have to understand is that this area, you have your Himalayas. So India, or I apologize, South Asia, is not going to get influenced by places like China that much, because there are some very tall mountains that act as a barrier with East Asia. So the influence, the foreign influence, is not going to come from East Asia, but rather from the Middle East and from the Western world, because this area is a little more open and there's more likelihood of invasions coming this way. And that has been happening throughout South Asian history. Nomadic peoples coming in through this pathway to come into South Asia. But here's the thing. Most invaders, they come in and they start to integrate with South Asia, and they begin to assimilate, and they begin to incorporate the practices of South Asia. So this idea of separate regional kingdoms, the idea of the caste system, these invaders throughout history have usually blended in over time with the population that was already there. But the second thing is, because we have such regional diversity of kingdoms, they usually don't pull together to keep the outsiders out. So when we look at the inability to stop invasions, that's because of the political nature of South Asia. They are so decentralized that no strong kingdom lasts long enough. Now, the Gupta would have been an exception. There's other empires that do develop. I would put out that the Gupta eventually gets conquered by the Huns, and it breaks up back to those regional kingdoms. So you have this idea that invasion is going to come from the West. And in the 700s, the next set of invasions is the Muslim or Islamic invasions. But what happens is that Islam is going to impact South Asia, in South Asia will impact the Muslims who come in. So the biggest presence of Muslims is going to end up in the northern and western area. So kind of right up here, which makes sense. The southern area tends to have a little bit more organized government and can resist invasion. But this is located right next to the Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate. It's connected to that Islamic world. So it makes sense that your stronger Muslim presence, I apologize for advancing, a stronger Muslim presence is going to be in this region. And today you have the state of Pakistan, which is a Muslim state. So you have this idea that this Muslim presence down the road is going to break off into its own country. And we'll get to that later in this course. But even as the Muslims invade, there are a series of kingdoms called the Rajaput Kingdoms. And these kingdoms are small, fiercely independent Hindu kingdoms that are able to resist the military invasions of the Muslims through the centuries. So even within this growing Muslim presence, you have these kingdoms that are Hindu in nature, maintaining some type of traditional Hindu society. So what you've got developing here is a mixture of Hindus and Muslims, and local Hindu authorities maintaining their traditional practices and traditional beliefs. At about 1206 to 1526, the Delhi Sultanate is going to be established. Now, I'll tell you right now, you see anything with the word sultanate, that is going to be a Muslim kingdom or a Muslim state. So this Muslim state, pretty significant in terms of landmass, is going to develop called the Delhi Sultanate. And yet the people living in the Delhi Sultanate, the South Asians who were there originally, they don't necessarily convert over to Islam. So now we've got an interesting situation. We've got a Muslim leadership governing a largely Hindu population. And that brings me to how these two groups interact, because now we have cultural interaction. And one of the things is that when we have cultural interaction, we are going to get cultural diffusion, where ideas are going to exchange, and we're going to get syncretism, where ideas are going to come together to create something new. So, first of all, there are converts to Islam. They're going to come from two places. The first place they come from are from, we'll say, disappointed Buddhists. By about 700, 800, the Buddhist monasteries that populate South Asia are becoming associated with corruption. They are not the righteous, moral places they once were. So a lot of people are becoming disillusioned with Buddhism. And Islam is another salvation religion that is seen as incorrupted or uncorruptible. And that's so a lot of Buddhists are going to convert over to Islam. But another group, of course, are your lower caste Hindus. Those lower caste Hindus who look at their system of the caste system and say, there's really no opportunity for me. Islam comes along and says, Allah can save you. And that is very appealing to a lot of the lower castes. So once again, we're seeing the power of what we would call salvation religions, bringing in new converts based on the message of you can achieve salvation in this lifetime. Second, the Muslim invasion, if you will, the Muslim expansion into South Asia, you have two things going on. First of all, you can't get much different in terms of religious outlooks than Islam and Hinduism. Islam would have looked at Hinduism as polytheistic, worshiping many gods, rejecting that there's one true God. Hinduism would have seen Islam as being simplistic and not being, being overly scholarly. The idea that Islam won't allow for the depiction of God would have struck the Hindu worshiper as a weird, strange development. So as Muslims come in and they do start ruling sections of South Asia, we do see that some Muslim rulers begin to they begin to acclimate themselves to the Hindu culture. You have Muslims start to occupy the caste systems divisions, and they start to identify themselves with the caste system divisions. You have some Muslim rulers who start to wear the clothing of the traditional Indian princes or the traditional South Asian princes. You have a variety of practices and respect for Hindu worships practices, and even some of these leaders adopting aspects of the practice. So we kind of see that Islam and Hinduism, there's a tension there, but there's also overlap and cooperation. This competition as Hinduism is losing followers and adherents creates a backlash called the Bhakti Movement. And the Bhakti Movement is a movement within Hinduism that places an emphasis on devotion to personal deities. So it takes the religion of Hinduism and starts to emphasize the idea of worshiping gods more so than used to be, making sacrifices to the gods. And this concept is something that is appealing to people because it creates religion at a less abstract level. And it also increases the likelihood of someone having an experience with the divine. You know, it's one thing to study the works and try and have a realization. It's another thing to worship a God and ask for intervention and then to experience the God's presence with you. And the Bhakti movement begins to take shape in about 900 CE as a reaction to the arrival of Islam. The role of merchants and the Sufi missionaries, this cannot be understated. While there are Islamic armies that come into South Asia, the real spread of Islam is due to merchants who are making connections through trade throughout South Asia and through Sufi missionaries. If you remember, I mentioned Sufi before. The Sufi missionaries focus on a charismatic idea of religion, and they focus on a mystical idea of religion, a connection, a personal connection between an individual and the divine. And the Sufi can easily translate the Hindu connection with their gods to the connection with Allah. So the Sufi missionaries are able to bridge the gap between Islam and Hinduism. And a lot of Sufi missionaries are seen almost as gurus of South Asia on the same level, having this mystical knowledge about the divine. And then lastly, the development of the language of Urdu. So with the arrival of Islam, you have the language of Arabic. And Arabic is, if you want to be Muslim, you need to be able to read the Quran. The Quran is written in Arabic. That's how you read the Quran. So if you're a West African Muslim or you're an Indonesian Muslim, Arabic is a language that you know and will use. So what happens is the native languages of South Asia, Hindi, is going to provide the grammatical structure for this new language of Urdu, while the vocabulary of Arabic is going to be put in, and also Farsi. Now, you remember the Arab movement east went through Persia. So the Persian language of Farsi is also going to be incorporated. So now we get these three languages kind of coming together, and that's the principle of syncretism. This idea that three different things come together to create something new. And today, the language of Urdu is spoken in Pakistan as their national language. So it's another example of how cultures interact and something new is produced. So that's South Asia. The next thing to focus on is Southeast Asia. And I will take myself and I'll move myself up here towards Russia, a little bit north of Mongolia, I apologize. And I will dominate that area of the world. So Southeast Asia, when we talk about Southeast Asia, and this is where geography comes in handy, what I want you to see is that South Asia is in the green. Now, Pakistan is cut off in this particular map, but the modern states of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, that represents South Asia. East Asia, which we've already talked about, China, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Mongolia, that represents East Asia. And then stuck right in between the two regions is Southeast Asia, which today Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Indonesian islands, Malaysia, Singapore, everything that's in red here represents Southeast Asia. So we can take a lot of what we're about to talk about and apply it to this region of the world. Because what happens is that as the green interacts with the yellow, that trade is going to bring cultural ideas through the red. And that brings me to letter B. The Indian Ocean trade that develops is going to take South Asian culture and put it into Southeast Asia. Merchants, missionaries are going to be working their way through. And as a consequence, cultural ideas are going to spread back and forth. But if you think about this, if you relate it back to the first lecture about East Asia, you know that in about 1100, 1200, China is more than capable of sailing. They just don't need to because the world is coming to China. So there's really no reason for China to go out and sail to the Philippines and to Indonesia. So what that means is the influence in this red area can largely come from the West, from South Asia, and then, well, from South Asia primarily. So we'll look at how that develops over time next. But the big thing is the spread of religion throughout Southeast Asia. Basically, we can break this up into two parts. I would say from about 800, that's a good rough time frame. 800 CE till about 1100 CE. The predominant religions that are spreading into Southeast Asia are Hindu and Buddhist. So the merchants that are going along these Indian Ocean trade routes are Buddhists and Hindus, and they're bringing their religion along with them. After about, you could say 1000, 1100, even in 1200, Islam starts to kind of take over. Now, that's not to say that Islam wasn't introduced to Southeast Asia before 1100. It was there. But your rapid spread of Islam is going to really take place in 1200. And again, it's the merchants and the missionaries that are doing this spreading. We'll talk about that more later. But I do want to point out one thing. When we look at the world's distribution of Muslims, if we go to countries that have the largest Muslim population, and this is a religion that begins in the Middle East, in the Arabian Peninsula, the world's largest Indonesia, or the largest Muslim population is right here in Indonesia. That's where the world's largest Muslim population is today. And the idea that that develops is from trade. And that's going to be the big thing we want to focus on in our last slide. And I don't have a lot of places to go here. I will go up here and I will shrink. Boom. Okay. Perfect. I can fit right there. And I can also look at the camera, even though my forehead is cut off. There we go. A little bit more. I apologize. This is also a quick little break. And there we go. So with Southeast Asia, myself up a bit more. With Southeast Asia, there's two maps that I want you to take a look over and follow along. And empires are going to develop in this region of Southeast Asia because you have so much trade going on between these islands and the Indian Ocean. That trade is critical to the development of the states. So where it says development of empires, if I go back for a second. Nope. Yes, let's just go back for a second and just talk about letter B for a little bit more. The role of Indian Ocean trade in political development. The reason why these states develop is because they tax and control the trade going on. Empires that tax and control trade are empires that can grow in power and can grow in strength. So the ability to control the trade is vital to the wealth and the power of the state. So as trade picks up along the Indian Ocean, and you have merchants coming in using wind patterns and wind routes, or wind patterns, that's the right word, seasonal wind patterns to access these islands. Now, these islands are what we call the Spice Islands. And spice is a highly sought after commodity within this Indian Ocean trade network. So these spices were so valuable that merchants were willing to pay high taxes in order to acquire them. Based off of that taxation and control of trade, we get four based empires. Four, they say sea based, and what I mean by that is that they're based off of the trade from the sea. Um, the Trivijaya Empire, you can see that up in the first map in the purple. And if you look at this thing right where the S is, that is a water route called the Straits of Malacca, Malacca. And this is a critical passageway. And what happens if you want to get to the Spice Islands, if you want to get to where the spices are, you have to go through these straits. And what happens is this empire taxes that trade route, and they grow in strength and power between 670 and 1025. So they are largely an empire that grows off of the taxation of the trade. However, the Mataram dynasty is going to form here in this pink called the Java Island. And the Java Island is basically a kingdom that grows spices and has a great deal of agricultural output. So this empire bases its wealth on trade. This empire bases its wealth on production, particularly of spices. And what happens is that both of these areas are going to adopt the religion of the merchants. Hinduism here in Trivijaya. Sorry, I'm going to try that again. Trivijaya. Here in Trivijaya, we get Hinduism. And then under Mataram, you get Hinduism and also you'll get Buddhism. Now, eventually what happens is that the Trivijaya Empire is going to fall and the Mataram Empire is going to fall and a new empire, a new kingdom is going to emerge called the Majapahit Kingdom. And that is going to be the basis for the modern state of Indonesia. I apologize, not India, Indonesia. So when we look at Indonesia and we see this network of islands, it's this empire that starts to bring that centralization together. And it starts to lay the foundation for the modern state of Indonesia. And the Majapahit is going to be a Buddhist and Hindu influenced society. Meanwhile, on the land, in what is parts of Vietnam and also parts of Cambodia, Thailand, this region, actually, I guess Cambodia is a little bit more up, but this region is what we call the Khmer or the Angkor Kingdom. So you can kind of see them both here. You can use either one. Today, there are famous ruins, or there's a famous temple called Angkor Wat. And it is a Buddhist temple now, but it was built as a Hindu temple at the very beginning with a lot of Hindu references. What's important to understand with all four of these empires is that they grow and develop because of their role that they play in the trade in the Indian Ocean, and also the role that they play in the spice trade that develops. But they also are heavily influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism. You can remember those two things, and you just recognize and place these empires somewhere in the world, you're in good shape. Then Islam arrives. And Islam is going to arrive with both the merchants, because the Indian Ocean becomes more and more Muslim merchant, and also Sufi missionaries who come along who, once again, can bridge Hinduism and Buddhism to Islam. So what happens is that these people, particularly in this region, they begin to convert over to Islam. Now, the motives are the same. The caste system, the lower caste people are going to be motivated to convert to Islam. But another thing develops is that political rulers in this area are going to convert to Islam as well because it's good for business. So if you take a look at this bottom map, you can see the sultanates. And you can see these sultanates start to develop and emerge throughout Southeast Asia. So this is taking place 1300. And the Southeast region is starting to go away from Hinduism and Buddhism and start going to Islam, but the culture of Islam and Buddhism is going to be retained and maintained even up to today. So, with that, I bring the end to South and Southeast Asia. And I look forward to you guys bringing your questions to the class. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of the night. And I will see you next time. Bye.